Thanks for joining Multifamily Talks, a Real Page podcast. On this episode of the show, I'm joined by Dave Brackett, Senior Vice President of Milhaus. Based in Indianapolis, Milhaus focuses on developing and operating properties in second-tier markets with the specific strategy of being first into neighborhoods that need investment, a strategy we get into during our conversation. We also explored the importance of company culture as it relates to recruiting, particularly Dave's own experience with Milhaus, the small world that is property management, and Dave shares learnings from his time on both the operations side of multifamily as well as on the vendor side. And with that, let's get to the show. So joining me today is Dave Brackett with Milhaus. Dave, I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast and joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Andrew. This is going to be exciting. This is my first podcast that I've ever done.
Excellent. Well, I'll up the game on you. It's the second podcast that I've ever hosted. The first one was earlier this morning, so we'll see how this continues to roll. But you and I have known each other a very, very long time. We worked together way back in the day. But the audience might not necessarily know you as well as I do. So why don't you give us a little bit about your background, what your how you got to Milhaus, and what you're doing over at Milhaus, and then we'll ask a little about what Milhaus is doing.
Sure. Well, you're right. We've known each other forever. I was at Oakwood back in the day, Oakwood Worldwide. We were one of the largest management companies in the country back in the late 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s. So I worked at Oakwood, worked mostly on the property management side of things, but I also worked with the corporate housing folks over there. So I started getting experience in the furnished housing world back then. After that, I went to a small company named Starpoint Properties out of Beverly Hills. They're still around. Great company, great bunch of people. Just a small boutique company that picks their times to get in and invest and really does a nice job with what they do. Archstone came after that, and with Archstone, I started off as the GVP for Los Angeles, quickly expanded to Seattle, and from there took over the western half of the U.S., where I split duties with a friend of mine named Matt Smith, who's been around also. He's been in a lot of different companies since Archstone, just like myself. But we ran the company from the property management side of things until we sold the company in late 2012.
Right.
Archstone was a great place to be, large multifamily REIT. We had a great culture, really loved being there. I think one of the best experiences I've ever had was at Archstone, and it was actually after we announced that we were going to sell the company. We were able to retain 95% of our employees between the time we announced the sale and the time we actually executed the sale. Now, you have to understand, that's over a course of about 7 months.
Yeah, that was not a short process.
Right, because we were a public company. We had to announce it early. We had to go through an entire process to get there. So that's one of the great experiences that I've had in this industry, to be sure. After Archstone, I went to the Irvine Company and had a great time at the Irvine Company. It was a short stint, but I was brought in to help them really reconfigure how they were doing property management. And if you don't know the Irvine Company, they're a large, very large company based in California. All of their multifamily assets are in California, and they're not very geographically diverse. In other words,
the ranch.
On the ranch, they had about, at the time that I was there, it was about 40,000 units just in Orange County. And to be honest with you, it was about 40,000 units in a 10 square mile area. So There was a lot of apartments. There was a lot of cannibalization going on between the buildings, and they needed to figure out how to do it differently. They had heard that we were doing things at Archstone with leasing pods and wanted to investigate that. So we did that. Took about 2 years to get it up and running and rolling it out. I thought it was a great program. It really worked. And it was a lot of fun to do that too, to get out of the box and figure out something different. After the Irvine Company, I was asked by a friend of mine who was in San Diego. He had a company called Fashion Furniture Rental. Brian Pigeon was one of the owners of the company. He was also the CEO, and he approached me one day. We just happened to be in Cabo San Lucas at the time. We were playing golf, and he waited until about the 18th hole of a beautiful day, and decided to drop on me that he'd like me to come down and talk to his brother and his dad about taking over for him as the CEO of Fashion Furniture Rental. I had already left the Irvine company at that point, so there was nothing holding me there. And I decided, yeah, why not? And went down. I wanted to do something different, wanted to spread my wings a little bit. So I got on the vendor side of things and had a great time at Fashion, did that for 6 years until COVID came. I managed my way through COVID with the company, got us through. We were cash flowing. COVID hurt the rental furniture companies and a lot of other companies pretty badly. But we got through it. But by the time we got through it, I realized that what I really was missing while I was at Fashion were the geographically spread out teams that I would have in multifamily. And I was missing running a larger organization too. So I decided to put my feelers back out there and to go back into multifamily. And the first opportunity that came up was Milhaus. And when the recruiter called me and said, "Hey, Dave, I got this great opportunity for you. It's in Indianapolis." I said, "Bill, I live in San Diego, um, a place I consider maybe the best place on earth, and you're asking me to move to Indianapolis." Yeah. He said, "Yeah, I know that's going to be a tough sell, but one of your ex-bosses is on the board. He thought it would be good for you to talk to these guys. He thinks you'll like them. He thinks you'll like the culture." I didn't know anything about Milhaus at the time. I'd heard of them, but I didn't know anything about them. I started doing my research and thought, this looks like a pretty cool company and it looks like a place I would fit, but it's still Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, after going out there and interviewing with them, oh, and it snowed the day before I got there. So that was a mess. But I got there and I interviewed with them and had just a wonderful day talking to all the leaders at Milhaus. Even though it was 10 degrees outside and snowing, I walked out of Milhaus, got into the car that was taking me back to the airport, called my wife and said, "I think we got to figure out how to make this work." So I guess I'm an easy sell, but but they got me. And since then, I've been commuting back and forth from San Diego to Indy, but I'm getting ready to move to Indy here actually in about 2 weeks. My wife's going to move out there and we'll be there permanently in 2 weeks. And to be honest with you, I've grown to love Indy. It's a beautiful place.
Oh, it's a great
San Diego, but I do like Indy a lot.
Yeah, Indy's a great city to go. But I'll say it to visit because obviously I don't live there, but it is one of those areas that I actually really enjoy going to. But hey, there's a lot that you just gave in there that I want to go back and unpack throughout this conversation. But let's start where you finished. Clearly, there was something about the culture and the people of Milhaus that if after your first set of interviews in person, you were already calling Lisa and saying, "Hey, we're going to be going probably." What was it about that really stood out to you that day?
Well, if you look at the Milhaus website, you'll see a lot of fun. People are having a great time. You can see the camaraderie there. And camaraderie is something that I've always cherished in all of my positions. Oakwood, we had a great sense of camaraderie. Archstone, it was fantastic. The Irvine company had a great sense of camaraderie. So, and Fashion did too. But I always look for that as one of my main selling points. And you could see it on the website. You could see they talked about culture. You could see they had an idea, and the culture permeated everything that you saw on the website. But what you see on websites isn't always what real life is. Yeah. And so when I got out there, though, Andrew, I could feel it the second I walked in the door. At the time, we were in this old building that had been built. I think it was 1920 or something like
Oh,
that.
wow.
But obviously been all renovated on the inside and everything else. But it was completely open. I think there were 3 offices in the entire building. Uh, Tad, our CEO, had one. Greg, our COO, had one. And then there was another office, but we were using it as a conference room. So nobody else had offices. Nobody on the executive leadership team, nobody had offices. So it was that open concept that you've heard about so many times, but they were living it. They were living it. And you could see the collaboration happening. People just walking around, going from desk to desk, getting ideas together, figuring out how to solve problems. The conference rooms were buzzing all the time with meetings that were happening. There were good, viable, important meetings. You could just feel it in there. So the culture really grabbed me. And then as we were talking about the mission of the company, it really got me thinking because Milhaus's mission is to go into areas that are usually urban areas, although we do suburban also, but usually urban areas that need an influx of cash in order to regentrify the area. And has done a great job of being able to find those areas, go in, be the first or one of the first companies to spend the money, to bring the money in, to build a nice apartment building and to bring the business back into the area, to bring the residents back into the area, to really grow that area back to what it used to be a while ago. And I thought that was something I could really get behind. And that's proved out since I've been there for the last 2.5 years. I really get excited about that part of our business.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about your website, and of course, we've known each other a long time. I know you well, but I don't know Milhaus that well. I've worked with them in the past, but not this close. So I did my own digging as well. And one of the things that was clear was it's, as they put it, it's that second tier market they're going after, but that regentrification, that early entry, is that something that was truly strategic on their part? Is it something that's more opportunistic because they're seeing less competition for deals there? Or how is that really discussed within the organization?
I think it's both of those. It's strategic because there's less competition to go in and get those deals, and we can go in and it does. We don't have to have rents that are unrealistic in an area like that. We can go in. We can build a nice, beautiful apartment building that fits the area, that fits the feel of that area, and we don't necessarily have to have a plus 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 core type of rates. We can go in there with rents that are a little lower than that, make the deal work, wait and watch as the area grows and gets better, and then your rent growth will come after that.
So how do you think about that as the first entries in? As the operations officer in the group, how are you working with your teams, and what are you doing to bring that new client into that neighborhood? You've got to be, there's got to be some hook. There's got to be, something that you guys are doing either from a service level perspective or a product perspective to bring those, I don't want to call them first residents in, but really that first wave of residents in.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think we really understand our residents. We have a very young base of residents at most of our properties, and everybody does. I mean, we all know what the cohort is, 25 to 32 or whatever it is, but they're mobile. They want to be in areas where it's walkable, where they can get to restaurants, where they can get to the bars, where they can ride their bikes, all of that. So the company's really built itself around that cohort and what they've seen in our markets for that cohort. So, for example, Andrew, when we first started redeveloping the Fountain Square area in Indianapolis, one of the things that we saw was that we were building right on the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, which was just getting finished, I believe, when some of our first buildings were getting done. And we were literally right on the Cultural Trail. And what the Cultural Trail is, it's a trail that goes all through Indianapolis, goes past a lot of the historically significant buildings that are in Indy, et cetera. And it's a walking and bike path. And it's really nice. They use cool different colored bricks and all that kind of stuff to delineate it. And then they have signs all along the way about, this is so and so's house, and or this was where this group of people typically were, and all this stuff. And so we saw that, and we decided, hey, we should be a company that really embraces a culture of walking and biking, because these are the buildings, these are the areas where we're going to be. And so we started off building bike rooms, as simple as that. We built really nice bike rooms into our buildings. And I think we were doing that before a lot of other developers were doing that. And we put the bike pump in there and the bike repair station, that kind of stuff. But, we kind of built the buildings around what we thought our residents, our customers wanted. And so I think that's really how we evolved over time. You'd see now, we've recognized that dogs are a big part of apartment life. And especially when you got into COVID and all of a sudden everybody had to have a dog, right? So we evolved at that time to ensure that we were a company that made it easy for you to bring your dog in. We don't have breed restrictions at all. We don't charge exorbitant amounts for pet deposits or pet rent or anything like that. We build activities around the pets too. So, and I know a lot of people do it, but we really consciously have done that in all of our buildings everywhere, just to make sure we're really connecting with the residents. And I think that eventually just drew them in. It brought them in as those first people moving into those areas. They saw what we were doing.
Interesting. And it says, or you told me on our prep call on this, it sounded like that the idea of the bikes kind of made its way into corporate culture too, correct?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We had, that was one of the things I saw the first day I was there. I walked into the office and you go around a corner and there's a wall. And along that wall, I think there was 5 bikes that were hanging up on that wall. And I said to the person that was showing me around, she actually ended up, she's my administrative assistant, Emily. I said, what the heck's with the bikes? There's helmets on there and everything else. She goes, oh yeah, you just take one of those whenever you want, just ride around, have fun. If you need to take it to ride home, you can do that. Just bring it back. Okay. So I thought that was really cool. And we've done that. We moved offices recently. We moved into another old historic building, but we redid the whole inside of it. We've got a really nice bike room in there also. And folks, a lot of our folks ride their bikes into work, especially during the summertime, not so much in the wintertime. Few of them are nuts enough to do it in the wintertime. Don't get me wrong. I've seen them do it, but for the most part, it's spring, summer, fall. There's a lot of people riding their bikes, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing that in the winter in Indy. Like I've been on that path. You talked about that cultural path, and if I recall correctly, the 2 things I remember being on it was there's a memorial for where the train stopped with Lincoln's body after he was shot, and then the NCAA museum is on that path as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about, you talked about culture, and that's kind of what attracted you there. And I've got to think that, and maybe I'm wrong in this assumption, but I got to think for a group that's, building things like bike rooms and their things, putting on a culture pass, having high walkability, et cetera, that you're at least conscious of kind of the ESG conversation and, making efforts to be good corporate citizens. What does that culture look like within Milhaus? And is it something you guys are actively moving towards, or is it something that's just, hey, this is part of being a good human that we do?
Yeah, I think based upon our culture, I would say it originally was leaning towards, this is just, we're good humans, right? Okay. So we want to be good to the planet. We want to be good to our employees and also our residents. We want to provide an atmosphere and environment that the residents all feel comfortable, and the residents have great interaction with each other and all that. a lot of that is just business too, because if your residents are happy and they've got friends at your building, when it comes to renewal time, they're more likely to
Yeah.
sign on the dotted line. And really same for the employees, right? The retention is a lot better if the employees know that the company cares about them, and they know that they have friends that work there and they enjoy their job, and they know we have fun and all of that. In fact, Andrew, I would tell you, as an aside, right now, and I wish I was there, but the city of Indiana has a corporate sports challenge every year. And right now, our team is out there competing in this corporate sports challenge. And they're competing against, Lilly, the pharmaceutical
Right.
company. They're competing against Salesforce, and they're competing against all these other companies that are in Indianapolis. And it's everything from I think there's a 5K run to there's bike races. There's a pickleball tournament they added this year, which
Of course they did.
I was really upset that I had to come back to San Diego. I couldn't play in the pickleball tournament. But we do stuff like that all the time. It's just fun. But your question is to ESG. There's so many components of ESG, and as we continue to evolve as a company, I know that there are elements of it that we are actively looking at that we need to continue to investigate. We need to continue to get better at, because not only do cities require a lot of elements of this as we're building and we're presenting plans to build, but also our investors are going to need us to do more and more and more along those lines. So we have to be very active and engaged in that whole world. And I see us evolving as I speak. I've been very involved with it on our company side of things. And I think, over the next few years, we'll really have a lot going on as far as what we're doing on our construction, what we're doing on the S and the G parts of all of this, putting it all together.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the way a lot of operators, I should say a lot, a few operators I have the opportunity to talk to, and I would actually say that on the affordable side of our business, they're a lot more focused on it because they're writing grants and everything else, especially that S. And it's an area where I think we as tech providers have the opportunity to help you on that front with just tracking and reporting and being able to, if you can't measure it, you can't develop, you can't drive it. So, how do we help you measure those things? And those are kind of conversations we're having on our end as well.
Yeah. I think like utilities, especially, there's a lot of work to be done in utilities. We all know that. And it's not just, hey, how do we save money as a company, but if we can help the residents save money also on their utility bills, that's just even better for them and for us in the long run.
Yeah. So let me ask a question that's going to be a little bit of a curveball, but it's interesting. We do this, 23 voices campaign or number of voices to set up every year as thing. And we asked this question to everyone we interviewed for that, and it literally came down 50-50 to the answer. Do you consider utilities a controllable or an uncontrollable expense?
Technically, we consider it a controllable expense.
Okay.
It is, it's in our controllable expenses. In reality, how controllable is it? I think there are aspects of it you can control, but the utility companies, obviously, they've got to recoup their expenses too, and their rates are going up all the time. And our utility costs in many markets are fairly astronomical in my eyes. So how controllable it is one thing. So you're 50-50. I'd say you're still 50-50 because I'm telling you it's both.
Yeah. And there's not a right answer or a wrong answer to this question, but it struck us that of all the questions we were asking, that one was just, you could literally draw. I'm probably, if I have 100 podcasts and ask it every time, it's still probably going to be 50-50 on that.
Yeah, I bet.
So going back to, your experience. You snuck something you snuck two things in your experience that I wasn't ready for. The first one, I didn't realize that you weren't part of the Archstone acquisition of Oakwood. I didn't realize there was a break in between there. But that's not where I'm going. The second one you snuck in there was that at Archstone, a company that sold in 2012, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were doing a podded leasing program back then. You were doing centralization before centralization was the buzzword that it is now.
Yeah.
What was it? What was that experience like, and what were the lessons that you might share with others who are thinking about taking on an approach like that? Maybe not necessarily that specific structure.
Yeah. We were big enough. Our son was big enough, and at the time where we would have several buildings within, say, a quarter mile of each other. And we started trying to get creative on how we could do what everybody else is always trying to do, right? How can we share expenses, or how can we combine our resources so that we can get our expense levels down? And one of the ideas we started working with was the leasing pods, because we knew that, like, if you have two leasing agents at a building that's, say, 300 units, and right down the street you have another building that's 300 units, and you have two more leasing agents, why couldn't you just have, say, three leasing agents for all of those buildings? And then you just have to figure out, well, how do you get people from building A to building B along the way? So we started messing around with that. And I would tell you, I didn't necessarily do it at the beginning to save expenses. I really did it to see what we could put together as a framework to make the business better and make it run more efficiently. And one of the things that I saw when we were doing it, and it was what I hoped we would see, is once the salespeople got really comfortable with the other building or buildings that were around there, the salespeople could then really work with the prospect on a much more granular level and figure out which one of the buildings was actually the best fit for that resident. And then we'd have a much better chance of closing that prospect. And by the way, in 12 months or 10 months or whatever it was, when the renewal came up, we had a much better chance of being able to renew them at that point. So that was kind of a theory I had when we went into it, but it really played out at both Archstone when we were just starting this out, and then at the Irvine Company. And I would tell you that while I was doing that, while we were experimenting with it at Archstone, I got a call from Jerry Davis, who was the COO of UDR at the time. And Jerry asked me if he could come out and have breakfast with me at some point. I said, sure. I knew they were growing in California at the time. And Jerry came out, he goes, okay, I heard about this leasing pod thing you're doing. I said, how did you hear about that? He goes, I have eyes and ears everywhere, Dave. I have eyes and ears everywhere. So I just want to know, can you tell me about it? Because, we're in kind of the same boat as you guys. And I think it's a great idea. I'd like to also do it. So Jerry and I started talking, and I think it was farther down the road on the idea than he led on originally. And UDR has taken that to the very next level. Yeah. So I don't know. It's one of those things, Andrew. I've always liked to try to do things differently, and because it keeps things exciting, but also it can make you better. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to make Archstone better at the time. And obviously Jerry wanted to do that too. And it's worked at UDR.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I appreciated about working for you directly was that you gave us the rope to fail forward. And, as long as you're able to fail forward, that rope could either pull a company along, or if you kept failing the same way, eventually you're going to tie the rope around your neck, and it's your own fault at that point. Right. But no, that's something that has always been, I've always appreciated about you. The other thing you brought up in your overall bio that I want to go to, because I've had this conversation a bunch recently with a number of different executives, is, you mentioned that you went from I think it was Irvine over to Freedom Furniture and then back over. So you've been on both sides of the proverbial desk.
Fashion furniture, yes.
Fashion furniture, forgive me, fashion furniture. I'm not going to ask which one you like best because I see which side of the desk you're on now. But what are some of the things that you wish other multifamily executives understood about being on the vendor side? And what are some of the things that, from an advice perspective, you'd give the vendors about working with people on your side? Like, what's the one thing you learned more than anything else, I guess, is a better way to put that.
That's a great question. Because there are some lessons definitely to be learned there. I would tell you that at Fashion, we were a smaller company. We were California based. I had a Northern Cal distribution center and a Southern Cal distribution center. So we could handle basically all the major metros in the state. And Fashion liked the fact that I was able to go in there and I had all of my multifamily contacts from years over the different companies, over all the different conferences, over being in the being involved with CAA and all the local organizations,
Right.
all that stuff. So I was able to reach out and actually have contact with people and get a hold of people, because that was always the hardest thing to do, is how do you actually get a hold of somebody that you could help them out with. But you have to have somebody pick up the phone or answer the email or be in their office when you come by in order to make that connection to say, hey, you know what, I can really help you.
Right.
I have a product here that actually can help you, and I'm not just somebody selling something. I mean, I have an idea for you with how you could use my rental furniture and you could improve your occupancy, right? Who doesn't want to do that if you can do it? So, but it's always getting a hold of people is the hardest thing. Now, the longer I was with Fashion, the more I would say my contacts didn't go away, didn't dissolve, because I always maintained the contacts, but it got to be a little bit harder to get a hold of people after a while. And that's what I would tell the multifamily executives is, like, the vendors are always trying to reach out to you. And sometimes it's overwhelming, as you and I talked about. I mean, I can get 200 emails a day. And if I'm getting cold call emails from folks that think I'm, running our accounting department, that's a little tough to, have that one-on-one connection to get back to those folks with.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody I know, or if it's somebody that I think, has a product that really pertains to me, that I really should be talking to them with, I always try to, as much as I can, I try to get back to people, and I try to at least tell them, hey, look, I can't use your product now, but, feel free to reach back out to me in 6 months or a year or something like that. Or your product just doesn't work for our company, and here's why. Just so they can close the door. They can close the loop at that point. But I think that's what I would tell both sides is, look, the vendors have products that can help the multifamily executives. Multifamily executives just need to be open to listen to it and try to be creative and listen to the ideas and listen to the pitches as much as you can, because time is our precious resource. And there's so much that we have to do during the day that you just have to figure out which ones are really the important pitches to listen to.
So I won't ask you which ones you're listening to right now, but one of the questions I will ask is because obviously I'm on the tech side. We're here at RollPage's headquarters at this point, so obviously that's where my focus is. Is there a type of technology that you're excited about the possibility of being employed in the multifamily space? Is there something you're like, that will be interesting when? Maybe not something you're implementing now, but something you got your eye on for that next year or year after?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, obviously AI has infiltrated everything at this point, and we use AI for a lot of our electronic lead responses, and there's some other items that we utilize AI for, and I think that if you look at prop tech and the way it is set up right now, there's a lot of individual companies out there that have really good products, and they all cost money. And if you were to implement everything that's out there on the market right now, it would be tough from an expense control standpoint to have any kind of realistic numbers in order to get new deals done. Like your pro formas would not match up. You would not be able to get
Right.
deals done if you implemented everything that's out there. So somehow or another, I think prop tech needs um, to come together. I think there'll be a lot of mergers and conglomeration and a lot of that kind of stuff. Is I think if you look at the landscape, you'd probably agree with me. And with that probably comes some way of merging a lot of these technologies together so that it is not so expensive on a per unit basis to get the products that you really need. Um, the exciting things I see out there right now, I mean, I think there's some really um, cool new CRM systems that are out there that people may not be taking advantage of fully at this point. I think GBT is going to be something huge, and I wish I knew what more I could use it for because it's the coolest thing in the world. I mean, you just start typing in your thoughts, and these incredible essays come out of this.
Well,
I wish it was around when I was in college.
oh God, yeah. And I'll give you an application. When I first saw it and tried this, I wrote a prompt because I've unsuccessfully predicted the death of the ILSs probably 6 different times over the last 20 years. So take this with a massive grain of salt. And I've said this before on the podcast, but when ChatGPT first came out, my first thought was, okay, this answers a question as opposed to give you the resources where you can answer the question. So I asked the question, where should I live? And I'm like, I'm a software developer in Plano, Texas, in boom, boom, boom. And as I refined it, it got down to where it told me 2 buildings. Now, granted, those 2 buildings are a little bit older because it was trained on stuff from 2021 and not new deliveries. But that's where I was like, how is that going to change? Obviously, we're looking at it from a whole bunch of stuff, especially like from how can we help our users answer their own questions about our software packages without ever having to come to us for help, those kind of things. So it's
Right. The other items that are out there. I mean, we've experimented around with contactless touring. I think that's a really cool product. Does it work for us? Does it work in every scenario? It may not be as effective in certain buildings with certain clientele, but you can see how it works overall. There's that. There's, like I said, the AI stuff. I think anything that's connecting you to the prospect is great. We use a software that connects our residents all together. Kind of like a Facebook for the building. And, you've heard this
Sure.
for a long time, but some of these companies have really refined it into a science. And your activities that you do are on there. You have a whole bunch of restaurants and stores that are offering discounts on there for you, almost like a rewards type of program.
Yeah.
And it also provides a venue for them to be able to chat amongst themselves, or they can chat directly to each other, or they can chat just amongst the building. Hey, did somebody's box got left outside the door by UPS today? Hey, X so and so in spot 50, your lights are on. I mean, just little things like that, but also cool, bigger picture discussions where you actually have ways that the residents can say what their interests are. And then you can have a subgroup where the interests are in there. Like I actually live in one of our buildings right now until my house is complete. And inside that app, inside that software, we have a bunch of different clubs, like a book club or a wine club or a sports lovers club. And, you'll get little alerts. Hey, so-and-so's got extra tickets to the Indy 11 soccer game tonight. Do you want to go? So I think it's just cool. It's just another way of connecting the residents to each other and making that sense of community.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, our business is building communities, both the physical community, but also that emotional community that's in there. So, Dave, we're running up towards the end of our time, but I have two final questions that I kind of want to go to. So one of the things you mentioned several times, and you started it off, so I kind of want to book in with it. You talked about that culture at Milhaus, and it was just kind of evident when you walked through the door and you were talking with everybody else. I want you to give a little bit of a advantage to someone who might see this before they're actually interviewing for a position at Milhaus. If there's one trait, and I'm going to limit you to one, if there's one trait that you look for in a leader on your company from the interview process, what's the one trait that you're trying to dig into and find out, do they have this?
Are they humble?
Ooh,
Are they humble? My current leadership at Milhaus is humble, and I would tell you the other companies that I've been at, where we've had great culture, I've usually had a very humble person at the top.
That's a great one. That actually, it's one of the lessons I learned from Keith Duncan, who used to be over here at RealPage. Was just the lesson in confident humility and how that's very different than being, humbly confident. So I was not expecting that one, but I really, really like it.
Yeah.
Last question, and I kind of wrap all of them up this one. If you could recommend one book for someone to make sure is not just on their bookshelf, but that they've actually read it, what's your go-to book?
Oh, that's a great question, Andrew. One that okay, let me give you two. There's a concept of called the Net Promoter System that there's a guy named Fred Reichheld who worked with Enterprise Rent-A-Car back in the day. I used to work for Enterprise also. And it's really a great way of looking at your customer service, your customer loyalty that's out there. It's a measuring tool, but even if you don't use the system as your measuring tool, it still gives you a lot of thoughts about how you should be treating your customers and how you shouldn't be nickel and diming them, and how you should be just your relationship with them and how you can make them more loyal. So that's one from the customer relations side of things. And then from the employee side of things, there's a book called The Leadership Pipeline that I have passed around for years amongst all of my folks. And it's really about, and I think it has a lot of applicability in our industry, because it's really about how promotions work inside of a company, and how leaders can get promoted into positions where they actually stop the growth of the folks below them, either because of how they're still too ingrained and involved in the day-to-day aspect of things, and they're not letting their people fail forward. Andrew, like you talked about earlier, they're grasping on too tight, and they're stopping the progression of the next generation of leaders that are trying to come up through the ranks. And I think that's a great lesson to be learned. And I think it happens a lot in our industry, and we have to constantly remind ourselves not to do that. You may promote somebody because they're good at what they do, but you better make sure you're promoting somebody that's going to be able to then bring leaders along beneath them and bring them along, and have them be able to move into that position eventually, and not just stunt their growth.
Yeah, and I haven't read that one yet, so I'm definitely going to go pick that one up. We'll also need to make sure I connect you with our chief customer officer here at RealPage, because Net Promoter Score is everything right now in our organization. It has been a big push since change in leadership. But Dave, I appreciate you so much for coming on and joining us for the podcast. It was, like I said, you said your first podcast, our first remote podcast we've recorded as well. So I think we did okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it went off pretty good, Andrew. You're a pro at this already.
Well, I try.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Multifamily Talks, a RealPage podcast. As always, the views expressed are those of the individuals participating and not those of RealPage.